If I could ask you to take your seats, we'll start, and hopefully people will start to come in. So we are running late, and which means we'll run on into the lunch hour, but I promise to give you enough time to get something to eat. So I'm going to start with just a very quick outline of the aim of the session. And we have a mixture of panel members who have a mixture of experiences relating to the SDGs. From those who are delivering data from the statistical office all the way through to those who've got much more of a sort of a commercial or a private sector view of how are we going to deliver the SDGs. We also are going to demonstrate the UNEP platform on the SDG synergies with the multilateral environmental agreements to demonstrate very much how member states, particularly as they put efforts into reporting on one thing, they can streamline that so that it actually helps to produce some of the outcomes for the SDGs themselves. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Pali. Pali is probably the best known statistician, I have to say, in the world. He normally wears a yellow suit. So clearly Kenya has been a sort of, he's obviously feeling the pressure of this meeting, and he's sort of made himself much more somber. I won't do much more other than to say, if you're looking for transformation, if you're looking for a statistical office that is not only providing a service to its citizens, but is leading the way in thinking about how to shape the SDGs and how to get data that is relevant, real, and will be meaningful for policymakers, it is actually the South African Statistics Office. And I can think of nobody better than to take up the challenge than Pali. Pali.
Thank you very much, Jacqueline. I want to put this here. I would prefer to drive my presentation. No, okay, all right. I'll tap on it. You can turn it around that way. Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for the invitation and a very illustrious introduction. I know I have very limited time. I was going to preamble the introduction with an expectation that was made of me, and I hope I'll live up to that expectation. What I was going to preamble it with was, in that situation, I actually failed to live up to the expectation. So I think what one would have to look at, particularly looking at the SDGs, we have to think about the human activity model. What do human beings do in the environment in which they live? And then, of course, the MDGs to SDGs, which all of us know, the unfinished business. What the policy relevance of this is, and of course, the system of environmental and economic statistics, which really bringing that third estate into our equation of labor and capital, makes the big difference in the SDGs and in the world when you bring environment into the equation of how labor and capital articulate. And of course, the need for a systems approach to indicators, and of course, what are the underlying frames? The underlying frames, I think I leave to last, and I may not even present on that, but I want to discuss largely what the implications of the SDGs are. So the human activity model looks at human beings sitting on top of land, and that land has a number of layers underneath it. And of course, those who do economic statistics or statistics, you look at classifications of industries. You start with agriculture, mining, manufacturing, and so on, until you get to government, with the real economy being agriculture, mining, and manufacturing. And of course, the others being a superstructure to that. But these activities happen across time and across space. And how they interact is a matter that is very interesting. And that is where labor and capital plays a role. But by bringing environment into this equation as the third estate brings to bear the sustainable development goals, and how then we account to natural capital. And that is where environment becomes very, very important. Now, from MDGs to SDGs, we know that we had 8 goals, now we have 17 goals, and included in the 17 goals is the environment. And indeed, we are talking about the unfinished business of the SDGs with the environment coming in. You will agree with me that this becomes a very difficult situation which requires a systems approach to the way we want to deal with indicators and how we deal with the world issues. And a systems approach that deals with complexity. And complexity manages complexity. Those who have done cybernetics will know that to run a complex situation, you need complexity, and recursion is the underlying philosophy for complexity. What is the policy relevance? Of course, the policy relevance here on the SDGs is obviously the SDGs. For Africa is Agenda 2063, and of course for South Africa is the National Development Plan and the medium-term strategic framework for financing. And there, underlying that hierarchy, you look at what are the kinds of statistics, what are the kinds of things that are produced in that context. That just gives you context for a statistics system. We know that the SDGs give us 302 indicators. We mapped this SDGs on Agenda 2063, where we looked at 85 indicators. For the National Development Plan for South Africa is 75. And if you look at those 75, map them onto the medium-term strategic framework and the provincial growth and development strategies, which is things that occur below the national level, and the integrated development plans, we come to a match of about 35 indicators. And then, of course, other indicators. All in all, about 512 indicators that we have to deal with. Now, obviously, at a country level, particularly at the level of, how does this, okay, there it is. At the level of medium-term strategic framework, at the country level, you actually expect quite a lot more indicators. You can't expect to run a country only on 35 indicators. That is where that matches the SDGs 2063. But at the country level, you manage quite a complex system. And this complex system it invokes the system theory, and cybernetics here becomes, the organization of systems. And of course, Stafford Beer says diagnosing the system for organizations and looks at cybernetics and looks at it as a complex system. And where a complex system, you manage variety and recursion. And you can only manage complexity and you can only manage variety through a variable system. And of course, this approach has feedback loops. And the one that we are looking at such as SDGs, looking at 17 goals and 231 indicators and many other indicators in country requires a process of feedback loops that is very, very huge. And of course, on Monday, we'll be talking about big data. In that space, we are looking at variety, speed, and everything. And of course, when you look at variety and speed, you actually are looking at a system that has to manage a very big variety. And only a variable or a variety system can manage a variety. It can't be managed otherwise. It has to be that way. And of course, recursion is the underlying driver of enabling us to manage variety. When you look at this, you look at recursion, which is a mathematical property in the nature of organizations. And of course, it shows you this tree diagram. And it means that each one of the trees expands into other trees. And that's how the system has to work. So, most of the time, such systems require self-organization in the main, that you cannot impose it. It requires self-organization, but self-organization at times doesn't run as proficiently as we wish, you need to impose something on it. But in the main, you need self-organization. And of course, you have to look at order as an emerging phenomena in this complex system. And the networks are the ways that we can manage such a system. And distributed knowledge systems enable us to undertake this complex and manage these complex systems. Now, having said that, lands me into what UNEP has already is working on, and Jackie is working on that, on integration. That is, these 312 or so, or 231 or so indicators. To manage them, you have to understand how they are linked. What language are we using to link them? And of course, by linking them and hierarchizing them, you come to a level of integration on leave no one behind, which actually implies that it is related to everything else that is in there. Equity, prosperity, and the planet, which is what we are talking about, and investing in future capital. So what I needed to introduce to ourselves is that this system is a very complex system. Perhaps if in the next 3 minutes, I don't know how many more minutes I have, in order to now elaborate on how then the system of environmental and economic accounting plays itself in the country, given the complexity that I've just spoken about, that it is a complex system that requires variety to manage variety, and now given that, how do you manage it in country? I'll go quickly into how you manage this, and of course it's SDGs, NDP, MTSF, and other things, and of course here you're looking at economic statistics, agriculture, social statistics, environment, and justice, peace, and security, and governance, which are very important in dealing with things environment. And obviously, we have spoken about the list of indicators, 512 in all, and these are the numbers that we have for justice, peace, security, and governance. You cannot separate environment from dealing with justice, peace, and security environment, because in most environments where environment is at stake, you don't find a lot of justice, you don't find a lot of peace. Go to any mining environment on the continent or anywhere where there is contestation across land, you'll find that justice, peace, and security and governance are lacking in those environments. So the issue of environment is crucial. And of course, in terms of systems, here you realize that here is the system of national accounts, which tries to bring an understanding to how the world is organized. My apologies. And then we have the system of environmental and economic accounting, which looks at environment specifically, and then we have other systems underpinning this. And bringing these two, SNA and the CIA here, to manage this superstructure, it's quite a complex study. For statisticians, it's an interesting and a complex statistical endeavor. In relation to this, as we will see, that we've got a number of tools that try to look at the SIA as a standard. And we've got the system of national, this is moving much faster than I wanted. We have the SIA for energy, the SIA for agriculture, forestry, and fisheries as a standard for measurement that we have adopted as statisticians. And then, of course, we have the SIA for water as a system that looks at environmental and economic accounting, which was adopted by the United Nations Statistics Commission in 2012. It's still a fairly new standard. So I think in this process we should be growing together as we try to meet the SDGs. And of course, an integrated statistical approach is very crucial, which looks at outputs, dissemination, demographic statistics, economic statistics. We need to integrate data, we need to process such data, and registers and frames are very important, as well as surveys. And of course, to do that, you need standards and methods, and I've already spoken about the SIA. And of course, you need an institutional arrangement to manage these processes that I've spoken about. I've said that you need self-government in complex systems. But while you need that, you need indeed institutional arrangements in order to make them work. So this is the overview of the picture, and of course that's, and then of course the frames that we are looking for here are those statistical frames, and standards and classifications are very, very crucial. I think I'll leave it at that, but let me say what are the important things. What we are engaging now is a very complex system. It requires a hierarchized process to understand it, where variety manages variety, and you need a cybernetic approach to it. And that underlying it are frames, statistical frames that I've spoken about, geographic frames, classifications, and so on. So I leave this at that, and I think UNEP, in the way they have approached the indicator framework, gives us hope that we can actually, in a hierarchized fashion, understand the SDG environment, more importantly, because it's very complex and it brings environment into the picture. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Polly. We're going to move quickly through now into our panelists who will make comments from different aspects. And the perception is that the SDGs will be dealt with through a multi-stakeholder process. So the first representative of that framework then is Laszlo Boboli from from Romania, sorry. Sorry, so slight fatigue on that one.
Yes, thank you very much, Jacqueline. I am Hungarian from Romania. So it's from Transylvania, Dracula's country, if you know. So I am very dangerous. So thank you very much for inviting me. I am a politician, and you know, I prepared a written speech I delivered 2 days to the organizers, and they told me that it's better to have a PowerPoint presentation. And yesterday I started to prepare my presentation. I realized that I have to tell more. Why? Based on yesterday's discussions, based on this family, this community, which not just know better than anyone what is about SDGs, but we love SDGs. And we are very committed to SDGs. And Jacqueline told to us in this morning, who is in this room? We have to decide who is in this room. But I will continue who is out of this room, which is more important maybe. Who is out of this room? Or the global society. And we have to approach this knowledge which we have, and it's a treasure of us, to have, first of all, a communication network, first of all, to understand for the politicians especially, and that's why I told you, because I have some experiences in politics. I jumped in politics 26 years ago. I served like in Parliament for 20 years. Now I am the chair of Foreign Affairs Committee, and I had the chance also to have an academic background regarding SDGs, and of course to have some administration experiences in 3 different governments in Romania, and especially in those areas which are linked to SDGs. It's regional development, infrastructure, and like Minister for Environment. And of course, I had also the chance to serve like chair of CSD19 and in UNEP in Governing Council. So I have the puzzle and the map how we can go forward on SDGs. That's why. Can we have it on the screen? Yeah. Okay, let's start. Of course, 2015 was a cornerstone, and it's a new beginning for the world, in my opinion, based on, especially on these 3 events. Of course, we have these Sustainable Development Goals, which are, and you know better than me, the universality is very important, but the country leads process, and we will start with a lot of very vulnerable issues. And not only governments, but we have to include all the society. How to fulfill these SDG goals? And this is, in my opinion, one of the most important slides. Challenges, obligations, tools, implementation, accountability, and monitoring. And this is why I tried a little bit to focus on what we are doing in Romania and what is a little bit, regionally speaking and globally speaking, our main duty to open the doors and not to discuss between us these SDG goals. It's just, to show how complicated is SDG and all this relationship and all this area in different parts, and I will not enter in details because we know how important it is to link one to other. Regarding multi-level approach of the implementation, it's very important this level, different levels, global level, regional actions, national ownership and sub-national level. And I faced to these different levels on my different capacities how difficult it is to put institutions one to each other, to work together and to have a coordination. In Romania, we have a strategy for SDGs, for sustainable development since 2008. In the Parliament, I established half a year ago a subcommittee on sustainable development, and we tried to put together academics, NGOs, civil society, and we will establish, I hope, in a couple of months, near the subcommittee, which is very important, a consultative council of science. And will be a partner not just for Parliament, but also for governments. And of course, different stakeholders, which I mentioned. We organized a meeting of the Parliament 1 month ago, and it's important now. I will show you the parliamentary dimension. It's also present on SDGs and what the United Nations approved last year, because we have a very strong declaration of the Romanian Parliament. And that's why I tell you, without political willingness and without a very coherent structure of different institutions, will be a failure of SDGs. And we can have 300 or I don't know how many datas, indicators, if we will be not able to put them in different budgets of different ministries and different projects, and to have a coordinating system on national level will be a failure. So that's why it's a very strong declaration in which we started to revise the national strategy, of course. Secondly, to present a report in each year to the Parliament, how is going on and which are the duties of the Parliament in a legislative manner, and to establish a cross-sectorial, and I hope in this year, a cross-sectorial coordination center on the Prime Minister authority, because we have a committee, an interministerial committee. It's very difficult to fight with bureaucracy at the level of each ministry. How to influence policymakers? It's a very good question. We started to organize regional seminars in 2014 with IPU, with Interparliamentary Union. And I have to say that now it's a not a critical mass, you know about critical mass we have in my hometown in each year, not contest, but we walk around by bicycle about 1,000 people, and we fight for the right of those who are going by bicycle for health, environment. So, and we believe that this 1,000 people is a critical mass. We have to have a critical mass of politicians who understand what means SDGs and who are able, because they are in position in parliaments, in governments, they are able to convince the colleagues and different institutions to be together in these issues. That's why we organize these 3 regional seminars, and now we are a regional hub. We have a self-assessment toolkit on the level of IPU to ask parliaments what they are doing and what is their scope in the next 15 years. And, of course, based on this self-assessment toolkit, we are engaged, regionally speaking, to collect databases, Romania, and to have a regional survey based on our attitude, based on some politicians who organize these meetings, and now we have a critical mass of those parliamentarians, not just Central, Eastern Europe, Balkans, but former Soviet Union countries who understand what means SDG, and they are going back in their communities and they try to make something which is more coherent regarding institutional framework. Yes. Okay. So, regarding international cooperation, this is a very important goal, because we have a lot of institutions, a lot of NGOs, a lot of different parts of the international framework who are doing a very good job. But without a cooperation, without a dialogue between different institutions I'm talking about IPU because I am parliamentarian, and now IPU is not just, you know, a parliamentarian tourist and to meet each other 2 times per year, but it's a professional body which try to have a new strategy based also on SDGs. But we have other institutions, and UNEP and UNEA is one of the key agencies of United Nations. We have regional agencies, UNESC and others, who can put together and to create, I mention again because in my opinion will be one of the most important issues, to create a communication network, a global communication network which will be for our nations, which will be to change mentalities from kindergarten until the politicians, and to introduce in the schools more about SDGs, because all around us is SDGs. We have to change, and not we, because we are a family of SDGs, but we have to change the mentality of others, institutions, politicians, and other issues. So I will, it's very slowly this, okay, we have to wait. I mentioned about this, so together I think we will be able to do more for SDGs, and I am very honored that I can speak a little bit from the part of political life, how we can create a critical mass of those who love SDGs. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Laszlo. And now on to Konrad, who you met on the first day. Konrad is here as a Perm rep and will be talking from a Chilean perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give my remarks here regarding the Chilean experience. It's not so interactive as our dear minister here has. Anyway, challenges faced by Chile in SDG reporting. Monitoring changes in the SCP patterns requires a set of indicators that track the impact of policies and indicatives, as well as the institutional capacity to implement them effectively. However, proposing appropriate indicators to track changes in consumption and production patterns in the context of the SDG process is only one of the number of issues faced by countries such as Chile. Others include the construction and production of the chosen indicators. Many countries may face institutional constraints to be able to respond effectively to these requirements. Countries such as Chile face difficulties due to the nature of the statistical systems. And I make a parenthesis here, just to our dear colleague from South Africa, to a famous phrase, why make it easy when you can make it difficult? This is quite a scramble there we have. Although Chile has an environmental ministry, substantive aspects of the environmental policy remain under the responsibility of sectorial ministries. A recent study estimated that environmental expenditures in 2012 be around 0.3% of our GDP, of which only 22% were the direct responsibility of the Ministry of the Environment. This suggests that coordination problems may be a major issue, which has been stated very properly before. Furthermore, our statistical system is considered a decentralized one. That is, sectorial agencies capture statistical data, and the National Statistical Office has limited capacities. This structure generates major coordination problems and transaction costs. For example, in the case of Chile, the Millennium Development Goals were monitored by the Ministry of Social Development, while environmental indicators are reported by the Ministry of the Environment to the OECD, of which Chile is part. National accounts are reported by the Central Bank, and other statistical information is reported by the National Statistical Office. In turn, each of these agencies requests the specific information from other agencies, thus duplicating information gathering efforts. We anticipate that a similar situation will occur in the case of reporting data within the SDGs. For this reason, we have set up an inter-ministerial committee formed by the Ministry of the Environment, the Ministry of the Economy, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and the Ministry of Social Development in order to monitor progress towards SDG targets. However, it is unlikely that this will be sufficient, as we have heard before. Currently, we are discussing ways of designing specific institutional solutions to address the coordination problem. For example, we have set up an additional interministerial committee on environmental information, as well as one focused on substantive consumption and production. The number and responsibilities of these interministerial communities not only suggest that coordination problems are an issue, but also that we need to review the institutional structure of information gathering and indicative production. The efforts to monitor SDGs must contribute to that discussion. The problems faced by Chile are similar to other developing and middle-income countries. Henceforth, we believe that it is essential to consider these institutional constraints and the current international reporting requirements burden on nation states. Our approach is to facilitate coordination and develop new institutional structures, as well as to commit to specific statistical frameworks. In this case, we are adopting the system of environmental and economic accounts, SEEA, as we have heard before from other presenters, as the overarching framework for capturing and organizing environmental information. Recently, the Ministry of Environment approved the National Environmental Accounts Plan that commits to the adoption of the SEEA and sets out a roadmap to develop specific accounts. However, this may still not be sufficient. We also believe that the international community must reflect on the current global reporting burden. Perhaps a global reporting initiative which concentrates in a few key indicators that the requirements of different international agencies and commitments, such as the OECD, biodiversity, United Nations, among others, may be the way to go forward. Perhaps the reporting requirements implied by the SDGs is the opportunity to nationalize and make efficient the different indicators currently reported within an international system. We therefore call on you in this important meeting to discuss the issues raised by the SDGs in the context of other initiatives and national commitments. Finally, we believe that these types of considerations are essential not only to our countries to adjust, but also for the SDGs to be a successful framework in the transformative change we need to achieve sustainable development. And before I thank you, I want to thank myself for reading this without my reading glasses. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that superhuman effort. I was wondering why your arms were getting longer and longer as you were reading. Very good. Thank you, Corin. Perfect. So it now gives me pleasure to ask a colleague, actually, Charlie, as he's known to many of us, to actually report back on some work that's been done by 2 of our member countries. Charlie.
Thank you very much, Jackie, and if you don't mind, I'll speak from here, because that way I won't have to be looking at my presentation the whole time. I'm actually speaking to you on behalf of somebody called Rodrigo Pizarro, who works for the Chilean Ministry of Environment. He's the head of the environmental economics branch of that particular ministry, and he co-authored with 2 colleagues from the Swedish National Statistical Office, Vivica Palm and Nancy Steinbeck, a report entitled Monitoring the Shift to Sustainable Consumption and Production Patterns in the Context of the SDGs. And if we get the front slide up, you will be able to see at least all their names in the bottom right.
Yes, could you put the slides up, please?
And this report was the 3rd in a series of reports that we've produced in the 10YFP Secretariat. This is the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production. And it's looking at the issue of sustainable consumption and production in the context of the SDGs. As you know, there is an SDG 12, which is ensuring sustainable consumption and production patterns. It's not a well-known fact, but there are approximately 30 other SDG targets which point indirectly or directly to achieving sustainable consumption and production patterns. So this puts SCP in a very central position in the SDGs. But this report was looking at, in addition to the question of what are good indicators for measuring progress towards sustainable consumption and production patterns, what are the challenges? And Rodrigo, in his position on environmental economics in a middle-income developing country, which is doing a good job on statistics and a good job on environment, but is having facing quite a lot of challenges putting them together, was chosen as a co-author so that we could get, I mean, no one country can be representative of all the problems we face, but they really are in the middle, and they're addressing these challenges. So what you get now is my distillation of the presentation that he sent 24 hours ago when he couldn't actually come. He was due to give this himself, but I'm afraid we had a slight problem with the tickets. This is from his perspective, but what we hope will be useful for a lot of other countries facing the same kind of challenges in the SDG context. So, for middle-income countries, the challenges are especially difficult due to the high number of reporting expectations. And Ambassador Paulson just talked about the reporting burden. The range of existing reporting commitments related to international agreements, limited institutional capacity. It's not so much that institutions don't necessarily exist, but that the linkages between them at a national level are underdeveloped for the purposes of sustainable development. And I think that's the key here. You have these institutions, but nobody's ever tried to do the joined-up government that you need for sustainable development before, seriously. And the SDGs are that. If we take them seriously, that is joined-up government for sustainable development. Facing these challenges requires a global strategy. Sorry, I haven't finished that slide. Can you go back to the previous slide? Facing these challenges requires a global strategy, including institutional capacity building, including identifying common headline indicators. We have a set of indicators from the SDGs, but we have a lot. We're going to have to pick a core set of those to really make this practical. And then adopting one overarching statistical accounting framework to integrate it. It's not just overarching, it's integrative. Next slide, please. So, what I said briefly again about the SDGs and sustainable consumption production. We have 17 universally adopted SDGs with 169 targets. SCP is a standalone goal with 12 targets. There are SCP targets in 12 of the other goals. So 13 out of the 17 goals are pointing towards achieving sustainable consumption production patterns. And a total of nearly, by my count, 49 SDG targets are about achieving SCP. There is the definition of you, the best, most well-used, most comprehensive definition we have of SCP, just so everybody knows what we're talking about. I'm not going to read it out. It comes from an important international workshop that took place in Norway in as long ago as 1994. But that is, from our perspective, what SCP is. Next slide. So requirements for monitoring SCP-related targets in the SDGs. You need a set of comparable indicators, which in turn requires establishing appropriate targets. I mean, we do have those targets in the SDGs. Reviewing and enhancing current data sets. And I think when we say reviewing, it really is not just a case of reviewing what we know we have, but making sure we've found everything we do have. Because one of the messages, working with Jackie and her team, there is a lot of good data out there on the environment which is not currently recognized as official data yet. And we very urgently have to pull that into the SDG indicator process. And that was what Jackie and her team were largely focused on. It's presenting these reliable, vital data, if we're going to be serious about the SDGs, and getting them recognized quite often by national statistical offices who have had no role in collecting it and are simply, in many cases, unaware of it. It's also developing some new data sets. I mean, that will be necessary, but to be practical, we're going to have to make the best use of what we already have. It's strengthening institutional capacity, as I've said, individual institutions, but the interlinkages between them. It's conceptualizing and developing appropriate indicators. The Interagency Expert Group on SDGs has done that, but some of them need further refinement and improvement. And that is going to be an ongoing task throughout Agenda 2030. And then at the end, it's locking all this down in an integrated system of statistics so you can apply it. Next slide, please. So here are the basic building blocks for an integrated indicator set, where you start with the basic data or models, you build your institutional cooperation, you harmonize the data coming out of those data sets, you organize the data into accounts, and then out of that you create your headline indicators. Next slide, please. And this is the institutional reality that Rodrigo describes in middle-income countries, but basically in Chile. Basic data models are disconnected, institutional cooperation is limited and fractured, more than one institution harmonizes information, there exist multiple accounting systems. Next slide. Experience with the Millennium Development Goals shows that there was a lack of progress, really, on effectively monitoring progress towards the MDGs. And there were those 3 points. There was insufficient attention to implementation challenges facing the national sustainable development strategy processes. There was an absence of a strategy to help stimulate demand for better data at country level. And there was, and I've put it in bold, inadequate attention to support for statistical capacity from among the donor community. So it's saying that donors did not give enough support to developing the statistical capacity to actually monitor the MDGs. So it didn't happen to a large extent. Next slide. We now have the SDGs. We're developing and producing indicators for the SDGs in general and SCP in particular. This will pose a lot more challenges because, as you've seen from the slides that Mr. Lehtola put up, I'm sorry about that. There are a lot more targets, there's a lot more indicators, they're much more integrated. You know, it's much more challenging. And the MDG indicators they didn't really tell us that much about sustainable development, if we're serious about sustainable development, but they were constructed from relatively well-developed statistical sources, which is a big advantage. Some other issues raised by statistical capacity efforts related to MDGs. The SDGs reporting burden may have an unintended effect of reducing long-term statistical capacity applied to other key tasks. That's really interesting, but that came from Rodrigo. He sees that his government is going to put a great deal of effort into the SDGs, but this may divert from other important statistical tasks they have. He really felt, and he wrote a 10-page section on this, on the capacity building needs for developing countries generally, to enhance their SDG reporting capabilities and their overall statistical capacity, and that if we address this in the long term, it will better serve effective reporting on the SDGs. So, last two slides are the outline of a capacity building strategy, which is set out in the full version of this paper. First, and you've heard it before, there is a need to adopt the system of economic and environmental accounting as the central framework and as the standard accounting system to enable you to measure progress towards the SDGs. He would suggest, and we would suggest too, and the other authors from Sweden Statistics would suggest too, that we need to produce a set of central SCP-related indicators which are transversal across the SDGs. Maybe there are other ones that you will need as well, but if you use SCP as an integrative tool, it has very broad reach across 13 of the SDGs. You need to relate the indicators you're going to measure those targets to particular environmental and social data sources. This is a little bit what I said earlier about there is data out there, it's finding it, you know, it may be validating it as well, but the data is there, and it's a question of pulling it into the system from reputable, verified sources. And you need to develop a plan to perfect and produce some additional environmental statistics for your core set of SDG indicators. Last slide. And this is where it starts to become more institutional. You need to promote coordination, identify one focal point in the government for reporting and coordinating the production of SCP and other SDG indicators. You need to explore the construction of interinstitutional committees to develop and strengthen information capture and the development of priority statistics. And there are a range of other structural issues you have to address: sufficient financial resources to do this, qualified personnel, capacity with the institutions, adequate priority on the political agenda, all of which have been touched on today. And I think you will find that that was the last slide, but there is one more. No, sorry. Final comments. This is the final slide. Monitoring SDGs does pose enormous challenges to statistical and environmental institutions. It is essential to discuss a global approach to support countries' reporting requirements. The SDGs is a global endeavour. It requires resources and technical support, and devising a capacity building strategy which covers institutional development, but also agreement on the statistical frameworks you need. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlie. It's always difficult to be someone else, but yes, Conrad, please, in response.
Yes, 2 words. I want to say that we have exceeded our time here, chilly twice, but I'll take the blame, but I won't take the heat.
Thank you. So let's quickly move on then to our next speaker, Luther, please. If you would mind. Are you speaking there or up here? Okay, very good. And
I would like to take this opportunity to start by emphasizing, like my other previous colleagues, the positive step that the establishment of SDG represents, especially in the integration of environmental dimensions of sustainability along with social and economic dimensions. Now, you've seen this slide before regarding the data landscape. Definitely the shift represents a big change and a big challenge, because while the National Statistics offices have great experience in mobilizing social and economic data, they have less experience with environmental data. Fortunately, we do have mechanisms like, just next slide, like the Strategic Plan for Biodiversity 2011 to 2020, and its accompanying 2080 targets, which have stimulated a lot of attention towards mobilizing environmental data. And it is fundamentally important that the SDG process builds from and strengthens these mechanisms. I'd like to share a few examples from IUCN in terms of some key principles which would be useful in terms of monitoring SDGs. Definitely in terms of the principle of partnership, working together with the Biodiversity Indicators Partnership, which brings together more than 40 organizations working on development of indicators and monitoring biodiversity trends. This is one real quite good example of how we organize. I think as we talked about, how do we organize ourselves across organizations. The other example is what IUCN is known for many years, for about 50 years. We've had the IUCN Red List of Threatened Species that mobilizes data on extinction risk for over 80,000 species across the world. What is interesting here is that we do have individual scientists, we do have organizations across the globe monitoring this information using scientific standards which are agreeable to all, and it is possible to do this. The other example is Protected Planet, again, which documents over 200,000 protected areas. And again, this is just a demonstration that it's actually possible to have massive data organized and coordinated and collected through a coordinated framework. The other example is the key biodiversity areas, which again is a partnership that brings together a number of organizations to identify important sites for biodiversity. Just go ahead. The last one I would want to give as an example is the Biodiversity and Protected Area Management Program, which basically looks at enhancing existing institutions and networks by making science and knowledge available for building capacity to improve policies and better decision-making on biodiversity. And here the approach is establishing observatories, which are regional reference information centers or systems. And we do this at a level of multi-country or sub-regional levels, for example, with the ESC or with the SADC. And the interesting thing about this is that there are many lessons to learn from it. It's just a depository, and anyone is available to provide information that relates to the topic of biodiversity and protected area management. Now, what are the issues, if I may just summarize, which we learned from all of these practices and examples? One of them is certainly the lack of sustainable financing of the maintenance of this data. For example, the IUCN Red List is used by everybody, but nobody wants to pay for it. So that's quite important to note. The second one is that lack of metadata frameworks. I think we talked, the first presenters made reference to this. Basically, it's difficult to know who has what data holding and who is tracking what indicator. Just having a simple sheet which says who is doing what is really a nightmare. The other thing which has been talked about is about the data standards. A lot of, especially when we set up the observatories at the East Africa level and the SADC level, there's a lot of uncomparable data that is posted in there. And so it means that there's another level of work that's required, which basically means that you need to do a lot of cleaning up and harmonizing. And then finally, as has been already mentioned by my other colleagues, I think the era of SDGs does present something, because it definitely means that we do need to engage citizens. At least that is the intention. And so the issue of citizen science, how do we engage the public and communities in data collection and utilization? And I think that the big driver for this is going to be technology. ICT for tracking MDGs might be the way to go, mobilizing a number of billions of people on this planet. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lusa. And with that sort of request in mind about data and how we're going to handle things, I'd like to give over to our last speaker, David Gadsden from Esri, please.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today. I'm David Gadsden. I'm responsible for Esri's support for nonprofits and global organizations, including many of the groups in the room. So for those of you familiar with Esri, we're a technology company that provides geographic information systems mapping tools. What many don't realize is Esri was founded in 1969 with a commitment to advance geographic science and to bring technology and geography together. I've been reflecting for this morning, listening to the dialogue about the importance of integration across communities of practice, be they humanitarian or environmental, and I think a key strategy for enabling that discussion is putting some thought into what ties those communities together. And as a geographer, we would think or suggest that that tie is place. Where do we overlap with one another? What are the locations that we're trying to protect and the communities that we're trying to protect? How do the environments relate to those communities and those places? So our work over the last 47 years has been to advance the discipline of geographic science. There are many examples of those which we'll show in the following slide. Some of them include integration across many different types of federal, international research organizations to pull in potentially complex data sets to look at systems holistically. An example in the lower right corner being some work across the U.S. to bring in hydrologic systems nationally to be able to do effective monitoring, planning, event mitigation, etc. In the upper left-hand corner, sorry, I'll go ahead and do that. In the upper left-hand corner, we've done some work along with the U.S. Geological Survey in order to bring together open, available global data to look at ecology in a new way by finding the areas that are similar. This is a data set that hasn't been developed before. It allows us to look at any location in the world and find any other place which is similar based on its both climate, surficial geology, and some other factors. There's a similar effort underway in the marine environment. How do we account for change across the marine environment? And we need an accounting system that allows us to look not only across the ocean, but in 3 dimensions, as the depth of the water column is so important to currents and other factors within the ocean. Esri isn't taking this on individually. Esri enables and partners with the global community to try to advance this technology. The way that we've sustained ourselves over these past 4 decades is to develop technology that we license and sell to a user community. We reinvest nearly a third of that investment in Esri back into advancing the science. So we, again, our role as an institute, the original vision from our founder Jack Dangerman in 1969 still drives our work in our organization. So geographic information systems technology has evolved. If you're familiar with GIS, you're likely thinking of a desktop computer and someone that's been highly trained in order to use it. What's changed is as those individual geography professionals were coupled together to build larger systems where they needed to have a common database in order to solve challenges. Both database and server technologies evolved to support the use of this geographic information management at the enterprise level. That basically led us through the mid-2000s. Around that time, cloud computing evolved, and Esri began moving that entire advanced platform into a scalable network that we could scale out to support our entire user community, which is in excess of 350,000 organizations. The benefits of that are we're able to connect with open data services from around the world, including enabling those from our user community in a manner that they can be brought together in an effective way for visualization, analysis, planning, and a variety of applications. Possibly the best benefit, and I think one of the most relevant to this audience, is that it allows us to very quickly configure applications that can be provided to specific user communities, meaning maps over the web, maps and information products on mobile devices, on demand, becomes very easy to deploy compared to even 5 years ago. I think another idea that was sort of fell upon me this morning listening to the dialogue is that there is such incredible science being done in this room and the organizations that you're representing, but that last mile communication to the public by the how do we make this advanced science consumable for the population? How do we improve that sentiment of these challenges we're facing? And I think that visualization is very important, and we're thrilled that our platform, which has been focused on the science over all of these years, is now able to communicate in that medium, and I'll show you an example in just one moment. The other benefit of migration into the cloud is the vast amount of content that professional and authoritative organizations are providing, both through our platform and other technologies around the world, at a scale that allows Earth observation and local enrichment of local programs at a level that is entirely unprecedented. Esri's cloud platform we refer to as ArcGIS Online now has over 5.8 million items within it. Those may be map layers, those may be documents that are tied to maps, other enriching content. Those items have been contributed by over 3 million users. Early this year, there were about 4.5 million items in the platform. So this is increasing very quickly. One of the benefits is that allows integration and collaboration across an entirely new paradigm. It's not just about an individual organization's program and efforts. It's about how that open data can be enriched across everyone working on the topic and brought together to help enrich all of our work. So one of the things that we're thinking about a lot lately is this concept of a hub. And a hub is actually an instantiation of this platform for, let's say, a centralized entity or a coordinating entity to be able to provide data services and applications across that community of practice. The leading example today is with the City of Los Angeles that has taken this hub approach to unlocking all of the authoritative data that runs the city to provide a portal for that information to be available to the other city employees in a new way, but also a portal to enable those information services to the nonprofits, the community groups, startups, and other major businesses that are working in the city. That content is then able to be quickly configured into applications for citizen engagement, to tackle problems, whether it's where streets need to be cleaned up or the other challenges facing the city. Now, how does this apply to the Sustainable Development Goals? And we've been thinking very deeply about this at Esri. Jack Dangerman has been saying for many years that the pursuit of GIS is to enable a nervous system for the planet. And we've come to the conclusion that Sustainable Development Goals are potentially an accounting system for this nervous system that Esri has been envisioning for all of these years. So building on that hub concept, our hope is to make our technology available as an open engagement platform around monitoring progress against those goals. That might mean unlocking many focused local and regional and national programs in a way that can be aggregated upward. There are many examples of our technology being used in that capacity, but the idea is that we might be able to pull it together, and this is sort of the overall vision. By each individual goal and indicator, we can provide a dashboard by which we can look through the available data, progress and targets. And it's very important to note this data isn't only coming from Esri or organizations that have leveraged Esri's technology to work towards these goals, but really the entire global development community. My final point is that, again, that last mile connectivity to this content and topics is extremely important. And one of the most recent applications that has come to this enterprise GIS technology is the concept of story maps. Story maps take underlying geographic information and bring together photos, videos, infographics, and allow you to actually architect a bit of a journey through that story of what you're working on, in this case, individual goals. So we'll just look quickly at some examples that we've put together. These are open source templates. The dashboard I showed a moment ago is also open source. So these can be configured and deployed based on the topics you're working on and the stories that you wish to tell. I'm extremely grateful for the opportunity to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. And I should say that throughout next week, when we have the Sustainable Innovation Expo, we have colleagues who are going to be really taking the SDGs through their paces. We have Jim Donovan here as well from ADEC. So there are a lot of technology players who are really, I'm going to think, help not only governments but also citizens really participate in the SDG debate. Now, I'm going to just step to one side, and we're going to show you what UNEP has been doing with regard to the SDGs, with regard to web intelligence, before we go into the panel debate. One of the requests from member states to UNEP was to really face the challenge of how to streamline the burden of reporting. And in particular, the idea that was there a mapping which would help countries if they were duly doing their work towards the multilateral environmental agreements that would enable them to say they were reporting on the SDGs. And this has been a tremendous, what I would say, team effort across all of UNEP, across the whole of the UN. We've been working with the statistical systems, but here in-house, we've taken a particular stand in the last 2 months to try to map specifically what do you get if you work on the MEAs in terms of synergies with the SDGs and vice versa, to try to help us build a big gap, sort of a gap map of what needs to be done and where countries need to put their efforts into. But before I start on the display of the SDG mapping, I want just to reintroduce into the context about web intelligence. One of the things that we did when we built UNEP Live, which is the platform that we're running off, was in fact to make sure that A, it was in the cloud. So 2 years ago when we started developing UNEP Live, we worked directly into the cloud because what we wanted to assure was that everybody around the world who had any kind of connectivity, whether it was low bandwidth or high, would be able to, in one way or another, engage with this platform. More importantly, we wanted to have up-to-date information. And there can be no more up-to-date information than the tool I'm going to show you, which is how we wish to inform ourselves, not only about what's going on in terms of big events, but more importantly, what systematically is happening around the world in terms of certain particular areas of interest to us, biodiversity and so forth. So a web intelligence system is now embedded into UNEP Live, led very much by our team in Vienna. And I am very pleased to have Arne Schaal here with us. And the idea is that we want to listen to the conversations that are happening around the world through social media, through the print media, through the normal news media, but eventually and already beginning the scientific media and literature, the scientists themselves. What are they saying? Who's influencing them? And how are the messages that we see globally, politically, actually looking like when you get down into the setting of a national, a particular place in the world? So it's been developed and it will be completed in all 6 UN languages. We're going to show you where it is today. You can run into it on every part of UNEP Live. So it's in English, French, Spanish, German, and soon to be Chinese, Arabic and Russian. That means I can actually read the Russian literature in English and figure out what the heck's happening everywhere. So I'm going to ask Arno just to do a couple of screens and show you where we are. You're going to go live, yeah? Yes. We're going to search on biodiversity, is that right? Okay, just so you get a flavour of it. And why do we want this immediacy? Well, it's really important that we can actually reverse engineer a lot of the discussion. We talked this morning about the difficulty of connecting to everyday life. And one of the ways that we will begin to do that through this parsing of language and working in the context of others is instead of doing a crude Google search where you just stick in a word, the idea here is that we will influence the context discussions because we'll connect, in a sense, in the other way. So people will run into the UNEP and the environmental messages because of the way that we tag information, because we tag with ontologies, with intelligence, and really try to place knowledge that is required at the point of demand. Okay, so we're trying to restructure the world of knowledge so that actually all these great efforts to produce reports can be found in the right language at the right time, not just in time, but ahead of time, so people can make decisions. So we'll show you the first round, and then I'm going to show you all the outcome of the work that we've done on the synergies mapping between the SDGs and the MEAs. So over to you, Arno.
Thank you very much for the introduction. And I actually like the metaphor we just heard about the global nerve system, because in a way we are tracking the messages that are passed between the human neurons in this global nerve system. And for doing that, we ingest about 10 million documents per month into the system. And as part of UNEP Live, this extension now allows us to track all these global communication flows. And I want to show you a live demo, so everything you see here is live on the UNEP Live website. And there are some pre-configured topics in the upper left corner, for example, a lot of the parallel sessions that you have had in these 2 days. But you can also do a full-text search query, which I'm doing now on biodiversity. And the first result we get here in the lower left corner is 13,700 documents. That's over the last 2 months. And there are various sources that can be selected. So we have predefined news media and organizations, that's environmental organizations and government organizations, but we can also add social media, for example. It's probably a bit too slow to read, but too small to read, but you'll see that this search query is also translated in all these languages that support. So you now search for biodiversity across all 4 languages. And I have a total of 108,000 postings and documents in the last 2 months on biodiversity. You can track the documents, you can drill down and go on a sentence level and really see how this term is being used. There's a graphical visualization of the lexical context. There are a list of sources, who are the most dominant voices in the public dialogue regarding that issue, and what is each individual source associating with the topic. On the right side, there are various visualizations. For example, this keyword graph that gives you the social perceptions on biodiversity. Now that would be the global online view, but because we want to track specific stakeholders, we could now also deactivate, for example, social media and organizations. Then we get the specific associations by news media, which of course are a little bit different from the social media perceptions. In the previous presentation, we already saw the power of geographic maps. So of course this is being used as well. We have maps that show global information flows. These arrows show where does information come from and which locations are being referenced in all that online coverage. And you can also sort the results, for example, focus on this point, if you want a specific coverage on South America or on Africa, for example. So Jackie mentioned already languages, so we support these 4 content languages, but actually the analysis are already available in all the UN languages. So you can also, for example, select Arabic now, and of course we only process the mentioned languages before, but you can already do the analysis in all UN languages. Thank you.
Okay, so I really would like you to use the tool. It is more powerful than anything that Google has, okay? So that's the advert. Come to UNEP. Now, going back to being slightly more, I would say more mundane, but nevertheless very, very important. Part of the workhorse aspect of UNEP Live is to genuinely show all the good efforts that countries have been engaged in. So we're going to switch now to the screen and look at the online demonstration. Just one second. If you could just switch, please, the camera. Just go back to the beginning. Could you show the screen, please? Fantastic. Right, here we are. Okay, so when you go into UNEP Live, on the front page, I won't go there now, but on the front page, you'll see a button which says SDGs and Synergies. So if you click on that, this is the landing page. Wow. You know, if we ever thought we were doing good work in the environment, this is it. So, you know, that should give everybody a great deal of comfort because it tells you that there are tremendous numbers of things already in place which we don't have to replicate, where we can really make the effort to fulfill our multilateral obligations and at the same time start to deliver under the SDGs. So it tells us we're already in the game. Next slide, please. And now I'm going to move to the Montreal Protocol. The reason I want to go there, I don't know if Tina is here, but her team, Tina Vampili and her team here in Nairobi, have done a fantastic job. So with the Secretariat out to the parties, there's been a dialogue to say, do you agree that if we're collecting this indicator, it will fulfill the requirements of this part of the SDGs? So this isn't just our analysis, this has gone back out through the secretariats to really get confirmation. And you can see already that for at least 2 targets, goals, indicators, 2.4.1, 12.4.2, that hazardous waste, for example, and proportion of agricultural area under productive and sustainable agriculture are well served by the thing that sits under the Montreal Protocol, which is approvals of critical, essential use of methyl bromide. So a lot of work has gone into this direct mapping of where does this fit. Now, of course, it's not the entire picture. It doesn't fulfill the entirety of the target that's been set out under the SDGs, but it's what we can say right now, and it's how we can start to measure progress. Now, once we've gone to that, you can also go to countries. And when we've lift ourselves sort of from the global mapping, we can zoom down in to see, well, what is an individual country doing? And we can actually then look at a graph, and here's the one for France, where you can see how they have been performing over time in relation to the Montreal Protocol itself. And you see this kind of reduction, this massive reduction, which is what we would want to expect under the Montreal Protocol itself. So let's go to another one. We'll go to approaching the mapping for Goal 14. And at the top of the page, we'll have Goal 14 come up. So I'm always coming on this side from the SDGs into the, from the MEAs into the SDGs.
Now this is...
Sorry, oh, no, this is the other way. This is SDGs into MEAs. Sorry, I wasn't looking at the screen. SDGs into MEAs. So I've pulled up Goal 14. Just wait. I've pulled up Goal 14. You can see all the indicators that sit underneath there. And just look at the numbers of mappings that go across to the CBD. So we're already feeling that there's a lot of confidence in the system about how much we can do. Now we can move on to 14.5.1. And here you see this more specific mapping that takes us into 14.5.1 and Goal B within the CBD. So really deeply going down, to Goal C, really deeply going down, and then we can have the maps that show precisely for country by country where the information is and what the status is of those. Now, if we go onto the map itself, it gives us country by country information. If you were to click on the map, you would end up on the map page in UNEP Live, which we'll just show hopefully now, which will come up. So this idea that a member state will collect the data once, verify it, put it through the statistical office, I hope at this stage. It will get ticked off by the statistics office because it comes from the Ministry of Environment. And at that point, it can be used for many, many, many purposes. It can be used for SDG reporting, it can be used for CBD reporting, and it can be used for tracking progress within the larger targets. So we're trying to be comprehensive, we're trying to be consistent, and one of the things that we're tackling head on is this multiplicity of values that you find across the world. I'll just give the example of forest area, where you can go and find at least 15 different values for a country for area covered by forest, to FAO, sometimes to a part of the UN, within the national setting and so forth. So working together with countries on something called IRIS, which is the Indicator Reporting and Information System, we're trying to bring together, behind the scenes, so to speak, of the country level, the ministers and all the different sectoral ministries, together with the Statistics Office, to make sure that there is, in the cloud or in a combined or in a universal service, one value for each of the major indicators, which is then used by each and every one of the ministries for their various purposes, for national reporting, for SDG reporting, for regional reporting, for convention reporting, and so forth. And in this way, we really do see, and I say this advisedly from Europe, we reduce the burden of reporting by 40% by doing this within many of the European countries. And we hope to advance the idea right now so that many developing countries don't establish systems that are simply replicating what's already somewhere else. So I do hope that those of you who are sort of interested in informatics particularly would look at this, but I do want to take a moment to thank also the whole team from another division, from environmental law, Bala and all the others who spent huge numbers of time working with secretariats just to confirm that this is their reality and in fact it becomes our reality. So thank you very much, and thank you to all the team who helped build this. Thank you.
May I, it's a curiosity, may I ask if you can search there right now, live, the UFCC meeting in Bonn? Because I know that's going on now. No, UNFCC in Bonn.
Perfect, thank you. So now I'd like to go back to our panel whilst that's being searched for IPCC. And are there questions? I'm going to open it up entirely to the whole panel, or comments from your perspective about Sustainable Development Goals. Please keep it short so we can get as many from the room. Yes, please, Bala.
Thank you, Jackie. And first of all, thank you very much. You know, when we started discussing this mapping between the SDG targets and indicators and the MEA targets and indicators 3-4 months ago, I never thought that it can be converted into such beautiful presentation. Thank you very much to DEVA for this collaboration with the Division for Law and Conventions. I just would like to mention 2 or 3 points. One is coming from the biodiversity conventions as an example here. Some of these conventions have had decades of experience dealing with targets and indicators. For example, the Biodiversity Convention has been working on indicators since 2002. So we have full 14 years of experience working on the indicators issue. But the concern has been that as and when we started discussing the SDG indicators, the relevance of some of those data and information in terms of translating that experience into SDG indicators has been challenged quite significantly. So one of the key lessons for us from the Division for Law and Conventions is that how is it we are going to be preparing a little better as and when we are discussing these indicators into the future, because another 2 or 3 years, 2 years down the line, we are going to have a discussion on the post-2020 global strategy for biodiversity conservation. And in response to that, there are 2 or 3 things which I'd like to highlight in terms of UNEP's work. Of course, our work is more with the conventions, the parties, and the secretariats. We actually have mapped the individual indicators and targets across each of the convention with the SDGs. But on top of it, now we actually are working with more than 100 countries. That is our target. We still have not started with that numbers as yet. In terms of integrating or mainstreaming these issues into the national biodiversity strategies and action plans. We have more than 100 countries which are in the final stages or who are in the process of preparing these NBSAPs. And for UNEP, it's actually an opportunity that we are now trying to make use of so that these strategies already start integrating not only the need for statistically relevant and robust data, but also the information is relevant as and when countries start reporting to the SDGs so that we don't have to duplicate the work. And I don't want to lose the opportunity. On Sunday, we'll be launching a demonstration of this full tool, the entire tool on SDGs and the biodiversity MEAs. There is a publication that also will be launched, and also the briefs that will be there. Thank you very much.
Very good, Bala. Thank you. Well, there we have it again and again. How can we make sure that not only are the data collected and made transparent, but that they actually lead to effects in action plans? Questions now from the floor. Anyone else? Yes, sir, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Levi Nwankwo. I work as an assistant professor at the University of Ilorin. Secondly, I'm the immediate past vice president of Nigerian Young Academy, the youth aspect of Nigerian Academy of Science. Recently, we had a talk, a policy talk, and the issue that was raised was the issue of science communication. Mm-hmm. And in support to Lazaro, the MP from Romania, and Ato, I want to say that science communication is very important. We need to know how to engage the public. We need to know how to really transmit the science in a simple language they can understand. Then secondly, the issue of publications. Most times, the public don't really have access or have the skin of assessing our publications because they are specialized. There are possibilities of making the publication as simple as possible, and maybe in conventional, traditional newspaper, and so on and so forth. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm going to keep gathering questions, so any more from the floor? Any comments? Anyone else want to react? So, the panel, you've heard a great deal. Yes, Laz, one specific for you.
Yes, just a short comment regarding how to translate SDGs in a common language. So, I repeat again, will be one of the key issues of all of us involved. So we have to have a coordination on the global level, not just some intentions on different parts. Of course, one is parliamentary dimension, and as I told you, on the level of IPU, we try to make something. There are another dimension of different regional bodies. There are another dimension of national communities. But basically, we have to have a team, I don't know under which coordination, to have a map of those not related all these indicators, but to have also some priorities, and education is one of the key issues. Because if this generation will grow up, which are now in kindergarten and after that, and they start to think sustainably, will be another society after, I hope, after 15, 20 years. So it's a very serious issue how we will be able to communicate.
I'm going to ask Pali, because I was struck when I was recently in the capital, how many people are aware of statistics and how you've been able to transcend the boring nature of statistics and reach out, and whether you have special plans for the SDGs.
Well, It's a very trying environment, and I think it requires leadership. See, if you look at statistics, and I suppose all sciences, as instruments of trust across society, you have then to promote those instruments of trust, to engage conversations that create science-based societies, so that we do not become superstitious about things, but we are fact-based and so on. In South Africa, first 15 years, of course, the earlier years, 5 years, 7 years, we didn't rise to that occasion that much. But more lately, we are really in the public domain in engaging society about things that are statistical by using metaphors used on a daily basis, which translate the statistical evidence into their own daily lives. And that has changed the course of debate in South Africa. For instance, on a weekly basis or on a daily basis, I actually have to respond publicly on societal matters through the evidence that is brought by statistics. The Sustainable Development Goals, obviously, are now in the public domain as we engage society with the MDGs. What now the link is to look at the National Development Plan, which says these are our targets. And then the integrated development plans that municipalities use to try and advance service delivery to society. All those are really integrated, and on a very regular basis, we give feedback. So the schools, as we release some of the data, I'll be looking at radio stations because those are the most accessible things in society. If you take a person who comments, or a commentator on a racetrack, you don't have to see the racetrack to know which horse is ahead. And we have to use radio to try and bring visualization, imagined or otherwise, into the minds of people as we talk about reality. Of course, with television and everything, visualization even becomes much, much more palpable. So these are the things that statisticians have to go into. Obviously, the difficulties, the leadership, the appetite for risk of doing so against political, I wouldn't say interference, but political pressures that may emerge from the systems, because those do emerge, and you got to stick your neck out there. Thank you.
Very good. Do I see anyone else in the audience? Yes, I've got Sasha and Jim. So Sasha, please.
Yes, hello. My question would also be what UNEP will be able to do to help countries who would like to go further than the identified global indicators, specifically in the area, for example, of chemicals. We see that the global indicator now identified is focusing really on immediate poisoning. But how do we deal with the long-term effects? So is that also something you can build into the system? Thank you.
I can answer that very quickly, but Jim, why don't we take your question as well?
Thank you. Jim Donovan, ADEC, actually wearing multiple hats here, represented in the private sector, but also with the GEO6 and the Global CEO Alliance. I guess the question is, the private sector is embrace data revolution and business intelligence, and I guess, you know, David, I sort of fit in, and I'm part of that user group of Esri. How can we do a better job of translating the great work that's done here as science meets policy? But I guess representing the private sector, we are already, you know, using a lot of the business intelligence that you've put up there, and are absolutely embracing it to change the way that we do business. But so much of this urgent message needs to be brought to the CEOs, to industry, to change their business models that will also help pressure the policymakers, or bring a urgency to the policymakers so that we can come at it from a science and private sector. How can we do a better job of that and working with you? Thank you.
Very good, Jim. Thank you. I think with that, I'm going to give that question back to all of the panel. How are we going to actually engage with private sector? How are we going to make sure we get the urgency messages out? I'll quickly answer, Sasha. The time envelope for the first round is closed, sealed, and sent off to New York. However, there's a moment in time where we could put a lot of political pressure to say we can do better, we've got better indicators, and I think it would alleviate a lot of stress in the system if a few of them were enabled to be changed over the next year, because we see a lot of progress. So yes, we should focus on next year's statistical commission, and we shouldn't necessarily accept that what is written is going to be there until 2020. So hopefully in the debates next week, and in your debates in your own communities, that's something that we can really start to propel. But now let me turn back to the panel so I can get you all out for lunch, not too late. You've got several things hanging, ideas about how do we engage better, how do we communicate better, how do we put our ideas of urgency out there, and more importantly, what do you really think we can do together as a collective to make sure that the right people are in the room to discuss the SDGs? Who's not in the room? Who have we missed? And how do we actually bring them in? So I'm going to start at the other end, please, with David.
Just to reflect on your last point, who's not in the room? And I think, again, I think we've worked very hard on interoperability and open data as a global community across many different types of organizations. The question is that content being adopted by startups and sort of the new generation of developers and educators that are turning those information services into really useful and engaging applications. And that does strike me as perhaps a community that there are a variety of progressing communities that we need to find a way to pull together. I was here earlier this week at the Information for Communication Technology, for ICT4D, Information Communication Technology for Development event, which was 700 applied practitioners in the humanitarian, and because of the SDGs, now the conservation space. And it just strikes me that many of you would have appreciated that event. Many of those people should be here. So I think that these kinds of convenings, as much as we try to promote them, we need to think of how inclusively we can get everyone together.
Yeah, just to build on that very point of being inclusive, I think we do need to be mindful that there are a number of platforms that exist, and it is imperative that we do take an initiative to go out to some of those platforms. The private sector is well organized, and oftentimes meeting on its own, just the same way as the others do meet in silos. But I think that it is important for us to get out there now, rather than only expecting them to come in here. Yeah, that's just what I wanted to add.
Yeah, just a couple of points. One that comes from the experience with SCP indicators. There's a German guy called Heinz who lives in Australia, who has been obsessed with material throughput and sustainable management of natural resources for all of his research career. And he has built data sets for some regions around the world, from many cases from official sources, for Europe, for Asia Pacific, and for a lesser extent to Latin America and the Caribbean. I'm pretty sure that those data sets go way beyond for those two targets, 12.2 and 8.4 in the SDGs, go way beyond anything that's held in national or international statistical systems. So he has been helping, myself and also Jackie to feed that into the SDG process. But if there's Heinz in Australia, there are another 30, 40, 50 people around the world like that for other SDG targets. We need to find a way to get their data sets. They may look like pet data sets, but they are of a sophistication and of an integration which surpasses many official sources. So I think it's a really urgent matter that we go on a hunt the Heinz, if you like, around the world to find these people whose professional career in research and academia has been built on this, and they've accumulated data sets so they can tell it like it scientifically is. That is a huge resource, and I'm sure it's one that has not been properly tapped. And there's only one other point I'd like to make, and that is about data at a local level. I've been in environment conservation for 30 years, and I know how many dedicated people work at local, subnational levels, monitoring the environment, collecting data, to guide their conservation or environmental protection efforts. I'm sure that's not seen by most national statistical offices, and is not seen by many environmental ministries. So there is a whole other set of local actors who are building data, which is not being dragged into the system. And that, I've no idea how big it is, except that it's very large, but I'm sure that's another huge task, which would then remove the argument that we sometimes hear from people who don't want to see this happen. They say the data doesn't exist. The data does exist. We just don't know where it is, and nobody's bothered to pull it together before.
Thank you. Conrad.
Yes, very briefly. Thank you. I would like to join what Pali said before, something quite elemental. When we think we are, 7 billion people on the planet, with all due respect to internet and all that, I mean, I think it's 1.5 billion people who have it. What Pali said, the question of oral, and I speak now maybe for developing countries, the question of oral transmission. What you have heard, and I say this because you said the question of the radio, what you have heard is very different from what you see in a television screen. You don't retain more than, I think it said it's 25 to 30% of what you see on a screen. What you hear, you retain. And I say this as a starter. Another thing, for example, it's a national experience in Chile. In our newspapers, the main newspapers in Chile, we have a page, or at least half a page every day, on statistical things on the environment with numbers and figures. And another thing I have to say is the question of statistics, as presented by Pali, and I think in a very scientific way, we have to make it entertaining. Nobody wants anything boring. This is the thing. The numbers, it's like senior colleagues will say, anything but boring in this life. I know that, this is the thing. And last issue I want to stress, and has been said this morning in the session, the question of gender, the question of integrating, and I say now in economical terms, what you invest in women is the 100 factor that's involved there. This is crucial. Chile has in its main national issue the question of gender, and we want to say this internationally. This is a crucial issue.
Yes, like Pali and Charles say that the data, they are there. We have to take them and we have to translate them in different projects. So I organized 3 meetings in the last couple of months with the National Statistics Institute, and I asked them, somebody is interested about your data of SDGs? No. 1 or 2 ministries, they ask me, but just for report and not to put in place when they have to report or some voluntary report as made. So, in my opinion, it's very important, of course, the institutional framework, but to stay on the same table, first of all those who are involved, and after that, to create some institutional structure in which everybody has his obligation and they know what they are doing. Otherwise, will be very important meetings with I don't know how many ministries, but after that, nothing happens because we need a follow-up of this.
Great. And Pali, final word.
3 points to make. I think just to repeat, at the cost of lunch, of course. Surely, once we have high-quality data, you really have to understand that it is a currency, and that currency is a conduit of trust and facilitates sane discussions and conversations in society. Once we framed it that way, at any level where society has to converse and engage in its conversations, central stage to that will be this conduit of trust, so that we have a reasonably well articulated argument, even if we colorfully put politics around it and partisan politics, we at least at the center have things that we all agree on. And statistics is one such. Second, I think in relation to SDGs, the unfortunate part in the end has been that each indicator, each goal more or less had to get 2 indicators, and the negotiations degenerated into numerology. I think what UNEP has done in terms of these ontologies and semantics, it has recreated this into a hierarchized model that then relates to leave no one behind, be just, do that and that. And I think we have to grasp that moment to look at that hierarchy, because it makes sense in relation to what should be the iceberg, what should be the tip of the iceberg through which we can negotiate and discuss what is underneath the ocean, which is that iceberg, which is big. When we come to countries, it will be 2,000, 3,000 indicators. And I don't think we should argue whether indicators are many or fewer, because the body system works on several indicators, but we only have 5 that we recognize: smell, touch, hear, see, and taste. Now, we have to use the same analogy in relation to this indicator framework. Where do we hear, where do we see, where do we touch, where do we smell, and where do we hear? The third area is that there is an emerging standoff between statisticians and people who drive technology, even at the level of Statistics Commission. I think those politics between technology, statistics, and financing are getting toxic, and they're going to create problems. And the sustainable development goals and sustainable agenda for citizens is going to suffer. We need to nip those and bring these communities together to realize that it is crucial to discuss. So this session here really brings those, and I think these ontologies that are there have to go right into the Statistics Commission in order to resolve some of this. And lastly, I don't believe that we need 2 commissions in the statistics, Statistics Commission and the one for geography. No. The moment we do that at the UN level, we have 2 bulls, and they will run in parallel, and it will create work for bureaucrats instead of integrating and bringing those 2 things together. I think it is the wrong thing that UNDESA and ECOSOC can acknowledge or allow a geography commission. What has to happen is that statistics thing and this new thing must come together. What it creates in the new, fine, let's negotiate it and tear it out. But 2 parallel systems are going to undermine the integrative power of information. Thank you.
Wow, thank you very much, Pali. So, thank you all for waiting so long. Lunch is now upon us. We will restore ourselves accordingly to the restaurant. We will serve our 5 senses. And if I can ask you to be back at 2 o'clock, because we have a big session this afternoon and leading into the summary. But thank you very much. And can we thank our panel, please? Thank you.